Imagine the scene. An experienced skier, seeking the challenge of a lifetime, disappears into the imposing alpine mountains, leaving no trace. The mission was simple: explore new routes. But what he didn't know was that extreme conditions and an unforeseen storm would drag him into a mystery that no one has been able to solve to this day. What really happened to him? The answer lies somewhere, hidden in the snow. If you're curious to find out what happened, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next details of this mystery. The skier's disappearance profoundly shook the lives of his wife and friends. Imagine the immense pain of a wife who suddenly finds herself without news of the man she loved, unsure if he was still alive or if the mountains had swallowed her hope. The emptiness of having no answers is like an open wound that never heals. With each passing day, the anguish grew, and the uncertainty turned into an emotional storm that no one could fully understand. His wife, who still remembered his last smile before he left, now found herself lost in a sea of doubts and painful memories. She constantly relived the words they exchanged, the promises to return, but nothing seemed so clear anymore. Was he still fighting to return? Or was it already too late? And worst of all, she would never know. His friends, for their part, couldn't accept the idea that the skier, with so much experience and skill, could have disappeared without a trace. They knew he was more than prepared for the challenges of the mountains. They saw him as someone capable of facing the unthinkable. But nature has its own plans, and that treacherous terrain seemed to hide more than anyone could imagine. Every search by rescue teams seemed to lead nowhere, and the pain of uncertainty became increasingly difficult to bear. There were no answers, only more questions. Theories began to emerge: accident, human error, even something more sinister. But none of these explained the absence of such an experienced, determined man. With each passing day, the hope of finding a clue faded further. But his friends continued to believe that the answer lay somewhere, hidden in the mountains. Meanwhile, the local community continued to speak out. Theories varied, but the only thing certain was the weight of grief everyone carried. Some believed the skier had made a fatal mistake, others that he was lost somewhere remote. But there was something strange about it all. The pain of not knowing what had happened turned into an obsession, and with each day without news, the anguish became unbearable. What no one imagined, however, was that something was about to happen. A clue, until then lost, was about to turn the tide. The truth everyone sought was closer than they imagined. Despair continued, but a new hope began to appear on the horizon. In 2022, a new chapter opens in the mystery of the skier's disappearance. After months of fruitless searching, investigative teams begin exploring new approaches, using technology to re-evaluate the data collected during the expedition. It was then that a crucial clue was discovered. The GPS tracker the skier was carrying revealed something unexpected. Initially, authorities had dismissed the device as a simple safety accessory, but now, in light of the new analysis, it becomes the key to reopening the case. By examining the GPS records, investigators noted that, despite his sudden disappearance, the skier had moved through a specific area before disappearing completely. The recorded data points indicated that he had traveled a previously unexplored route, a region characterized by steep terrain, difficult access, and extreme conditions, making it all the more impressive that he had made it this far. What had seemed like a glitch in the tracker, or even a mistake on the skier's part, was now beginning to take on a new form. The device had not only captured his movements, but also suggested a direction, a path no one had previously considered. This new piece of information rekindled hope in the hearts of those fighting for the truth. After all, he might have survived longer than anyone imagined. The discovery of the GPS signal was a significant turnaround. For months, investigations had focused on the idea that he had been the victim of an avalanche or that the harsh mountain weather had swallowed him up without a trace. However, the fact that the GPS had picked up the signal in a remote area, far from known ski routes and virtually impossible to access, began to suggest that the skier might not have disappeared as suddenly and definitively as previously thought. Questions began to creep in. What could have motivated the skier to venture into this risky area? Could he have encountered something unmapped, some unexpected obstacle, or perhaps in a moment of desperation, he tried to cross to seek refuge in a safer spot? What had seemed like an unexplained tragedy now became an enigma that defied all previous hypotheses. What most caught the investigators' attention was the nature of the terrain where the tracker recorded the signals. The indicated area was far from the usual ski trails, and in fact was known for being difficult to access, with rock formations and unstable terrain common in unexplored alpine regions. This factor suggested that the skier may have deviated from his original route. But why? What motivated him to follow such a risky and isolated path? There were no signs of mechanical problems or loss of control. Everything indicated that he was in full possession of his faculties, with a purpose in mind. The mystery only deepened. Authorities, in collaboration with winter sports experts, now faced a new line of investigation. Was the skier trying to escape something? Was there a threat beyond the weather conditions that forced him to take an unexpected turn? Was he in fact the victim of an accident? Or was there something else the experts had not yet considered? As the investigation progressed, theories began to multiply. Some experts suggested that the skier could have gotten lost due to a simple lapse in judgment, taking a wrong turn in a moment of exhaustion or fear. But most experts rejected this idea. He was experienced, accustomed to the challenges of the mountains. It wouldn't make sense for him to get lost in terrain he should have known well. Furthermore, the weather conditions weren't that extreme at the time. What, then, could have led someone so experienced to venture onto an unknown route where the risks were obvious and fatal? Questions began to pile up, and answers, even then, remained scarce. However, what really caught their attention was the tracker's behavior. Although the signal had been interrupted, it had recorded a series of points that indicated intentional and continuous movement, suggesting that the skier was not in imminent trouble but rather acting with some purpose. This new information led investigators to consider a hypothesis that had never been considered before. What if the skier had encountered something in the mountains beyond his comprehension, something that forced him to take this risky and unpredictable path? Could he have found a dangerous location, but one with some personal value, such as an unlikely refuge or a point of interest on his journey? Perhaps he was trying to avoid something, perhaps an unexpected situation that forced him to move into a more remote and wild area. This new angle sparked a new line of investigation, with experts and investigators focusing on the possible reasons why the skier might have strayed to this isolated area. Was he a victim of uncontrollable circumstances, or was there a human element, an unforeseen factor that forced him to change his route? With each new clue that emerged, the mystery deepened. What seemed like a simple disappearance of an experienced skier turned into a plot full of complex layers and unexpected revelations. The story was far from over, and the search for answers continued, with more questions arising with each new step of the investigation. What else might the mountains hide? And most importantly, was the skier still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found? With the new GPS tracker's trail revealing an isolated, hard-to-reach area, the investigation into the skier's disappearance took an unexpected turn. Re-evaluating the data and using new technologies like drones and satellite imagery gave researchers the tools they needed to further explore the terrain where the GPS signals were captured. This modern approach brought a new perspective to the case, as the long-held belief that the skier had been the victim of a fatal accident or driven by extreme weather conditions began to be questioned. Experts, along with police and other professionals, began a detailed analysis of satellite imagery, which allowed them to precisely map the region where the tracker had emitted its last signal. The images were not just a representation of the mountains, but a window into the unknown. What had seemed an inhospitable and impenetrable area became a fascinating field of study, revealing previously overlooked details. Drones were sent to fly over the area, capturing high-resolution images, and it soon became clear that this part of the Alps was not only remote, but also full of geographic and meteorological features that could have influenced the disappearance. The dense snow, rugged terrain, and cliffs, which at first glance seemed insurmountable, now gained a new light. After all, could these elements be more than mere natural obstacles? Were they, in fact, signs of a path the skier had chosen for a still unknown reason? While satellite imagery offered a general overview of the region, it was the analysis of the weather conditions at the time of the disappearance that revealed the most. Real-time weather data collected by local monitoring stations showed that the storm that had hit the area was not as severe as previously thought. The idea that the skier had been overwhelmed by the weather's fury was dispelled when it was realized that, although visibility had been reduced, he could have continued his journey more easily than previously thought. The strong winds and thick fog weren't actually the biggest enemies that day. The terrain, however, was the biggest challenge. Some experts suggested that the skier, upon encountering an unexpected obstacle, may have decided to take a riskier route to avoid the more dangerous area, believing he would be on safer ground. However, no one knew for sure what he encountered there, what might have caused him to deviate. Furthermore, by revisiting old theories, investigators began to uncover elements that had not been considered before. Terrain and weather conditions were closely linked to the skier's behavior. Some areas, previously considered safe routes, proved to be potentially treacherous. Mapping flaws that had been overlooked began to raise serious questions about the hidden risks he might have faced. What appeared to be a well-defined route, a known and safe trail, was riddled with natural traps that only a careful observer could spot. The investigation also highlighted a critical flaw in the information given to rescue teams shortly after the disappearance. While initial assumptions about the accident were compelling, the data now suggested that the skier had made choices others would not have made, especially regarding the terrain. Perhaps he was aware of greater risks that others had missed, or perhaps he had discovered something extraordinary during his journey. The investigation also led experts to consider that the skier might have been more than just an adventurer. Some theorists began to raise questions about the skier's psychology, wondering if he was driven by something deeper than a simple desire to conquer a new descent. Had he actually encountered something not on the maps? A region of mystery, perhaps an ancient route, or a natural landmark unknown to many? Satellite imagery also suggested that, in some spots, the terrain might have been safer than it appeared. Furthermore, experts began to wonder if the skier was trying to avoid something beyond what others could imagine. Could he have sensed a greater danger, perhaps even a presence or threat that was not obvious to others? What appeared to be a simple disappearance turned into something even more complex as new pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. As more data was collected and analyzed, the theory that the skier had been lost due to weather or an accident became increasingly tenuous. What had seemed like a simple error of judgment began to reveal itself as a decision made for a specific reason. The skier, it seemed, was not just trying to descend a mountain, but was on a journey of discovery, a path he believed would lead him to something greater, something he might be the only one to perceive. Each new clue, each new piece of data, only deepened the mystery, and what had previously seemed a simple tragedy now seemed to be connected to something much larger and more complex. The truth about what had happened to the skier was still far off, but the new discoveries began to indicate that he had somehow been ahead of everyone else, caught in a race against the unknown. By re-evaluating weather conditions, GPS data, and satellite imagery, investigators were now more convinced that the true story behind the skier's disappearance would soon be revealed. But the question remained: what had he encountered in the mountains? What had driven him to such a risky path, so far from the beaten track? Meanwhile, the search for answers continued, with investigators more determined than ever to uncover the truth about what really happened. Each new piece of information brought them closer to revealing what was happening in the mountains, and perhaps shedding light on the skier's fate. But the truth undoubtedly lay somewhere between the relentless snows and the unsolved mysteries of the Alps. As the investigation into the skier's disappearance progressed, new clues began to emerge, and with them, key figures emerged to further aid or complicate the mystery. The first person interviewed was a fellow expedition member who had a close relationship with the skier and who, for some reason, was absent at the time of the disappearance. His name was Victor, an experienced skier and longtime friend. During his conversation with investigators, he revealed that there had been a dispute between him and the skier, a dispute over routes to take. Victor believed the route the skier proposed was extremely risky, a choice he claimed was not on any reliable map. He recalled suggesting the group take a safer route, but the skier insisted on continuing with his own plans. Victor, uncomfortable with the decision, decided to go another route, unaware that this choice would result in the group's separation. Victor's testimony raised doubts. Why would the experienced skier insist on such a dangerous route, especially as the weather conditions worsened? The decision to split up seemed impulsive, perhaps even irrational. But was that enough to make Victor a suspect? Victor's explanation seemed sincere, but something didn't add up. If he truly believed the route was so risky, why didn't he pursue it further? The search for answers became increasingly unclear. Meanwhile, the investigation turned to a group of local skiers who frequented the area where the skier had disappeared. These skiers, while not directly involved in the case, may have had valuable information about the terrain and conditions. During one of the interviews, one of the local skiers, Jean-Luc, began talking about a peculiar experience he had had a few days before the disappearance. Jean-Luc and his group were in the same area and reported a series of frightening encounters with wildlife, including a pack of wolves that seemed to be following the skiers closely. He mentioned that he had found a large footprint which appeared to be that of a bear, and that the group decided to alter their route because of it. Jean-Luc's story seemed like a mere coincidence, but when the account was analyzed in conjunction with the skier's GPS tracking, it became clear that he had ventured into an area where wildlife were frequently sighted, an area known to be dangerous for those unfamiliar with the terrain. Theories began to form. The skier could have encountered one of these wild animals and possibly been attacked or forced to move away to more dangerous terrain. But at the same time, new questions arose. If the skier was so experienced, why wasn't he able to handle this situation? Or was he actually avoiding something else, something unrelated to the animals? There was a growing sense that the skier was dealing not just with the wilderness, but with an even darker, more unforeseen threat. The investigation also led investigators to interview mountain guides, people who knew the terrain inside out and had a deep understanding of the Alps' peculiarities. These guides reported a number of unusual behaviors regarding the skier. One of the guides, a man named Pierre, mentioned that he had heard rumors about the skier having made a discovery before his last descent. According to Pierre, the skier was very interested in a specific region of the Alps, an area no one had explored in depth until then. Pierre didn't know exactly what had led the skier to this area, but rumors of a significant discovery began to circulate among the guides. They speculated that the skier might have found something of value, something related to a potential avalanche risk or a geologically unstable area that could have led to his disappearance. But the clues were unclear, and talk of a possible discovery began to generate even more speculation. Some guides began to wonder if the skier had taken too many risks, perhaps in search of something that shouldn't be found. There was a growing feeling that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that his curiosity about something unknown had led him to make dangerous decisions. What had he found? Something related to the terrain, or perhaps a discovery of historical significance, something that could have caused a major stir, and that the skier, in his relentless pursuit of challenges, could not ignore. As they pieced together all this information, investigators began to suspect that the skier's disappearance was more than a simple tragedy caused by a lapse in judgment or an accident. Interviews with Victor, Jean-Luc, and the guides raised a host of new questions. Could the skier have been involved in something much bigger than he realized? Was he trying to uncover something that should be left alone? Or perhaps he had been the victim of a more serious threat, something the others couldn't fully comprehend. Suspicions began to grow, and each person involved seemed to know more than they were willing to reveal. The search for the truth was far from simple, and with each new testimony, the mystery deepened. What had seemed like a journey to brave the mountains now became a story full of untold secrets, and investigators were beginning to realize that to find the truth, they would have to contend with much more than the extreme conditions of nature. The investigation deepened. Previously hidden secrets began to surface, completely changing the understanding of the skier's disappearance. One of the first revelations was that the skier, although always seen as an impulsive adventurer, appeared to have meticulously prepared for his expedition. He had researched the area in advance, studied old maps, and spoken with local guides, something previously unknown. This discovery raised a new question. Was the skier simply seeking adventure, or was there something more at play? His behavior, before setting off on the expedition, his insistence on following an off-the-beaten-path route began to be interpreted differently. The idea that he was simply seeking a challenge faded, and the investigation began to take a more mysterious turn. The skier's behavior before the expedition was also reconsidered. Accounts from close friends and family pointed to something deeper. The skier seemed to be searching for something beyond the simple pleasure of descending new slopes. He spoke frequently of a growing sense of needing to discover something that was calling him. What had previously seemed like a quest for adventure now seemed like an obsession with a mystery he felt he needed to unravel. Some speculated that he had found something in the mountains, something that, to him, held the key to a great discovery, but that the rest of the world still didn't understand. The possibility that the skier was on a more personal and perhaps even spiritual journey gained traction. The narrative of a man chasing a sports record was replaced by a more enigmatic story about a man trying to understand something beyond the limits of physics and nature. He was searching for something that could change his life, but what could it be? The culmination of the revelations came during a confrontation with one of the local guides, a man named Pierre, who revealed key information about the skier. Pierre, during a tense conversation with investigators, admitted that he had heard rumors about a discovery he had made in the weeks before the disappearance. What had the skier found? Pierre didn't know for sure, but there was something in his demeanor that suggested he was approaching something important, something the others were missing. He seemed determined, as if he had found something that compelled him to continue, even against his better judgment. The question that arose then was, what had he discovered? Pierre, initially reluctant, eventually spoke of a remote region of the mountains, a rarely explored area, where it was said there were traces of ancient passages, or even something more significant. But he didn't know exactly what it was. This secret, which had been kept secret for so long, began to reveal that the skier was after something much bigger than any simple ski expedition. He seemed to have found a clue to something unknown, something beyond ordinary exploration. This secret began to form a new narrative. Perhaps the skier had gotten lost not just because of the weather, but also because of his own obsession with something unusual and impossible to fully understand. Tensions rose as investigators began confronting the other people involved in the expedition. During a series of interviews with rescue team members, some began to suggest that the skier had, in fact, been diverted from his path by an outside force. But what did this mean? The skier might have been forced to head toward an area no one expected, but why? The prevailing theory at the time was that he had followed a more dangerous ski route, but new data disproved this explanation. Now the search for answers began to focus on a different aspect. If he wasn't simply diverted by the weather or terrain, what else could have driven him down this path? GPS data began to suggest that the skier was drawn to something, as if he had found something that somehow compelled him to keep going, regardless of the risks. This impulse led him to stray from safe routes, regardless of the consequences. During a crucial moment in the investigation, a team of experts was sent to re-examine the area where the skier was last seen. They brought more advanced equipment, including high-definition cameras and thermal sensors, to try to capture signs that previous searches had missed. The terrain, previously considered impenetrable, was revisited with a new perspective. And that's when one of the thermal sensors picked up something no one expected. A human form. A figure partially hidden in a nearby cave. The images showed a silhouette with a shape that matched that of a man, possibly the skier. But when the team arrived at the area, there were no more signs of life, only traces of a recent presence, as if the skier had left in a hurry, or worse yet, had been removed from the site by an outside force. What remained was an even greater mystery, a sense that the story was far from solved. The twist wasn't just about what the skier might have encountered, but also about who or what had forced him to change his fate. The confrontations and revelations continued, and investigators were only beginning to understand the full scope of the skier's journey. What he had discovered in the mountains was still waiting to be revealed. The investigation culminated with the organization of a new expedition to explore more deeply the area where the GPS signals had been picked up. Now armed with more information and state-of-the-art equipment, authorities were determined to get to the truth. The expedition was meticulously planned, with mountaineering experts, local guides, and investigators from various fields. The team knew that venturing into this remote part of the Alps would face a series of challenges, particularly the extreme conditions the region posed: dense snow, biting winds, and the constant risk of avalanches. Every step in the snow was a calculated risk, and the tension in the air was palpable. As the team climbed the most perilous trails, they were aware that at any moment they might be forced to face the unknown. Hope for answers was high, but at the same time, the fear that something unexpected might happen loomed large. The research protagonist, who had already been personally affected by the loss of the skier, perhaps a family member or a close friend, knew this could be their last-ditch effort to finally put an end to the anguish that consumed them. They were about to discover the truth now. But what else would they find in the mountains? The questions were about to be answered, and the consequences could be as shocking as the disappearance itself. During the expedition, the team faced unforeseen challenges. Weather conditions were even more severe than expected, making exploring the most remote areas difficult. Satellite imagery and GPS data suggested they were approaching the exact area where the tracker had last picked up the skier's signal. But time was against them. Tension mounted as the team approached the region of interest, and everyone was aware that as conditions became more challenging, the risk of failure increased considerably. What would they find there? Would the skier's signals still be visible, or had time erased all evidence of his presence? Finally, after months of searching and twists and turns, the truth about the skier's fate began to emerge. During the final expedition, a crucial discovery was made. The team found clear traces of his passage in a remote cave, where the GPS tracker had recorded its last signal. The first traces found were marks on the ground and abandoned equipment, indicating that the skier had attempted to take shelter there, likely seeking protection from the extreme conditions. But what caught the most attention was what was hidden in that isolated area: a series of marks and signs left by the skier, as if he had tried to leave a trail, perhaps in the hope of being found. Deeper into the cave, what appeared to be a search for refuge revealed something even more significant. Investigators found a backpack partially buried in the snow, containing some personal items belonging to the skier. Inside was an expedition journal where he recorded his discoveries. In its final pages, the skier described a journey in search of something big, something he believed was hidden in the mountains. He spoke of a growing sense that he was approaching a momentous discovery, something that could change his life. However, the final entry was disturbing. He mentioned encountering an unfamiliar area with strange markings on the rocks, something he couldn't fully explain. It was clear he had found something, but what exactly had he discovered? This question loomed large over everyone. Justice was finally served, but not in the way many had hoped. While the truth came to light, it didn't bring the emotional closure everyone had hoped. The skier, it seemed, had been driven by an obsession with something beyond common understanding. He discovered something in the mountains that led him to make risky decisions, which ultimately resulted in his death. Authorities, friends, and family now had answers, but those answers carried with them a sense that the skier had been yet another victim of his own curiosity. The mountain, with its beauty and dangers, had been both the setting for his search and the site of his fall. And while the investigation revealed the truth about what happened to him, the price of discovery was high, both for the skier and for all who loved him. The emotional outcome of the case brought a mixture of relief and sadness. The truth about the skier's fate was finally revealed, but not in the way everyone expected. His search for a greater discovery, for something beyond comprehension, ultimately proved his undoing. For family and friends, the pain of learning what had happened was overwhelming, but at the same time, there was a sense that, at least, the mystery was solved. The skier's legacy was not only what he had achieved in the mountains, but also the lesson that, no matter how much we challenge the unknown, it can lead us to dangerous places. The mountains, with their beauty and mystery, would continue to hide secrets, and the skier, in his obsession with discovering the unexplored, would become a legend among those who dare to take the risk. The end of this story, though tragic, left a profound reflection. The search for answers often comes at a cost.